courage and kindness, strength and gentleness, fortitude and tenderness. A father, a leader and a lifelong teacher, a comforter and a patient listener, a hero and a world changer, a gift from God above. Being a father is a high and holy calling. It is not only a blessing, but also a stewardship. Fatherhood is a precious opportunity and a divine responsibility, because it is one of the many ways that God watches over all of us. A father is a protector and a provider, a hard worker and a family man, a role model and a faithful friend. And so from all of us to all of you, thank you to the fathers.
Your strength can be powerful. Your words can be fueling and inspirational. Your hugs can be deeply comforting. Your smile can instill joy and confidence. Time with you can be fun and productive. Your correction can be life-saving and life-giving. Adventures with you can be exciting and memorable. Today, just like every other day, and like many of you, I miss my dad. If your dad is still alive and is in your life, you ought to celebrate him. I know this day can come with mixed emotions. Some of you have no relationship with your father. Some of you have a strained relationship. Some of you have a beautiful relationship. Some dads are married to your mother. Some dads are married to your stepmother. Some dads are widowed. Some dads aren't married anymore. Some dads never married. Some of you don't know your dads. Others of you wish you didn't know your dad. Some of you can't live without your dad. Some of you raise your kids the way you were raised. Some of you raise your kids in spite of how you were raised. But what is important is in this moment is that all of the men in this room who are fathers, we celebrate you. I honor you. Some of the fathers in this room or who are watching online, you may have to live in the horrible reality that your own son or daughter is no longer with you through death or life choices. They have disappeared or are a prodigal. And today is hard for you. Your place in this world as a father, you are essential personnel. Your child's life, in your child's life, your influence and your impact is felt spiritually. You can bring foundation and direction through consistent prayer and reading scripture with your family. Tell your children why you love God. You can be there for your children emotionally. You can bring awareness and resilience by being open to learning about and discussing the critical momentums created by emotions, and carefully listening to your children and teaching them not to be allergic to their emotions and feelings. And mentally, you can bring focus and confidence and strength through your words of affirmation. Teaching your kids the importance of guarding their thoughts, since thoughts can turn into behaviors. And you can be there physically. You can bring relaxation, adventure, and pursuit, and strength, and affection, and activity to your family. Teach your kids the benefits of being active and showing loving affection. And relationally, you can bring a closeness, a steadfastness through your gentle love and service and presence. Gentleness is strength under control. Teach your kids about the importance and foundations of humility. And this is what I want to share with you today: being the best version of you. Strong, yet gentle. Courageous, yet careful. Hardworking, yet present. I could have preached on Father Abraham had many sons had Father Abraham. Could have preached on David, who birthed Solomon. Could have preached on the fatherly attributes of God the Father. But I believe the Lord has led me to a different place today in Scripture that may seem odd for Father's Day, but hang with me. Romans 11:29, the New King James Version. Just one verse, and I'm going to skip to another one. For the gifts and calling of God are irrevocable. For the gifts and calling of God are irrevocable. Now keep this verse in your mind, and we're going to skip way back to the book of Judges, chapter 13, verse 5. The New Living Translation reads, "You will become pregnant and give birth to a son, and his hair must never be cut, for he will be dedicated to God as a Nazirite from birth. He will begin to rescue Israel from the Philistines." I want to preach to you for just the next few moments on the topic, you still got it. Look at your neighbor, say, you still got it. You still got it. Maybe you're a senior saint in this room and you think you may have lost a step or two. I want to tell you today, sir, you still got it. And maybe some of you in this room think you never had it. But I'm telling you, there is something on the inside of you that you've got. It's not disappeared. It's not gone anywhere. It just may have been dormant for the last few years, but you still got it. Whether you go to church or not, you know who I'm talking about today. This man was a God-appointed leader or a judge of Israel before there were any kings. Not long ago, I preached about the Israelites leaving behind slavery in Egypt and being in the wilderness for 40 years, and then they're finally ready to cross the Jordan River into the Promised Land, and the walls of Jericho come tumbling down, and they occupy. That's the book of Joshua. The next book is the book of Judges, and that's where we're at. And there's a series of 12 judges recorded in this book who succeed each other as a judge of Israel. God, at this point, had set up the government as a theocracy. A democracy is a government of the people. A theocracy is a government that God rules. Theo is the Greek word for God. Kratos is the Greek word for government. That's the second part of the word. Theology is a study of God. And so God had set this up as a theocracy and put judges in place to lead Israel. And one of these judges is in place, the Bible says, for 20 years. Talking about the man who never should have cut his hair, Samson. And his story is remarkable. His parents, like Abraham and Sarah, couldn't have children. And an angel appeared twice telling them that they were going to give birth to a son. This is a supernatural happening. It's God's intervention in humanity. And the angel tells Samson's mother, look, your son is going to be set apart. He's going to be dedicated as a Nazirite, and it's important that his hair must never be cut. Samson is going to enter this world with a specific purpose. It's right there in our text. He will begin to rescue Israel from the hands of the Philistines. And for 40 years, God's judgment has been upon Israel. They've been overtaken and occupied by the Philistines. And the time has come for the tide to change. And then comes along Samson, a young man who is cavalier and arrogant and deceptive. He's growing up. He's strong, and he knows it. He's rebellious, and he knows it. But he's called. He has purpose on his life. And he will begin to rescue Israel from the clutches of the enemy. And how does he do it? He goes and marries one of them. This guy cannot get enough of the forbidden fruit. This man loves his Philistine women. And against the law of God, he intends to marry one of them. But God, who, as we know in the book of Romans, works all things for good. And he uses this decision to allow Samson to begin to infiltrate the Philistine network. And this woman who he intends to marry betrays his confidence. Samson's there, they're about to get married. He's with this group of 30 guys, and he decides he's gonna have this bet with these guys. And so he offers them a riddle and says, if you can solve this in a week, you'll win the bet. And this riddle is about this lion that Samson had previously killed with his bare hands. And then later on, he had passed by the dead carcass of that lion, and he found that bees had made some honey in that carcass. And once again, against God's law, Samson not only ate some honey out of that dead animal, he gave some to his parents without their knowledge, making them unclean. But the guys that he made this bet with can't figure out this riddle, and Samson's fiance, the Bible says, nags and nags and nags. It actually says that. Nags him all week to share the answer to the riddle with her, and he finally gives up, and he does. And it's on the seventh day, he secretly shares the answer with those guys. And Samson figures it out, and he's furious. And this sets off a chain reaction that results in Samson killing 1,000 Philistines with the jawbone of a donkey. Supernatural feat. Then the next part of the story is Samson hooking up with a prostitute. And while he was there in this Philistine town, the men had plotted to kill him the next morning. But Samson left town early in the night and escaped. Just more bad choices. And then we arrive at the part of the story with which everyone is familiar. Delilah. And once again, Samson is playing with fire because she's a Philistine woman. He's already been betrayed once by giving up information that was used against him. Let me tell you today, if you don't learn from your past, you will be doomed to repeat it. And what we find with Samson is an imperfect person. A man who has supernatural strength, who is handsome, who is sought after. Just look at me. I'm down 20 pounds. What's up? See me again in November when I've gained it back. But you see this guy who seems to have it all, but he's flawed. A man who struggles with the flesh. A man who struggles with making the right decisions. A man who struggles with self-control. He's impulsive and short-tempered. He's arrogant. He thinks the rules don't apply to him. He thinks he's above the law. Pastor, why are you talking about Samson today? He's not even a father. Not all men are fathers, but all fathers are men, and men have struggles. And these struggles have had consequences in your life. Maybe for some dads in this room, you don't even have a relationship with your kids, and it's killing you. Maybe some of you have gone through a really difficult divorce, and your children were forced to pick a side, and it wasn't you. Maybe because of some of your life choices, you think you've been disqualified for God's plan in your life. And so in your mind, the best that you can do now is just sit in a pew on Sundays. Maybe there are some characteristics in your life and attributes in your life that you would love to change. Maybe some things you don't like about your personality and you love to be different. You like to respond to your kids or your spouse differently, but you don't know how to change. Samson, at this point in the story, hadn't changed. He still dealt with impulse control. He still dealt with lust for forbidden fruit. And he falls head over heels for Delilah. Samson's life purpose is to begin to rescue Israel from the Philistine. But instead, he finds himself with his head in one's lap. This is playing with fire, and when you play with fire, you will eventually get. And the Philistine rulers in this moment, they see this relationship developing, and so they go to Delilah and they say, hey, if you'll tell us what Samson's secret is to his strength, we will give you 1,100 pieces of silver. The enemy wants to be rid of Samson because they know the power that he possesses. I want to tell you, the enemy will bring people into your life in an attempt to destroy you because he knows the power inside of you. You may think that you don't have much to offer. You may think that there's not that much to you, but allow me to submit to you today, there is greatness inside of you, man of God. There is destiny inside of you. There is purpose inside of you. And the enemy of your soul knows it, and he's going to fight you with everything he's got to stop you from living out God's purpose for your life. He's going to distract you. He's going to tempt. He's going to use your personal traits and personal bias against you. He's going to do everything he can to stop you. And the reality very well may be that the enemy's done a pretty good job at times. And you realize that you're flawed. But that's not where Samson's story ends, nor is that the place where your story ends. And so Delilah is money hungry, and she wants those 1,100 pieces of silver. And so she begins to beg Samson for his secret, to give her his secret. And you would think by now that Samson would have learned the first time. So Samson begins to toy with her, to play with her emotions. And first he tells her that if I'm tied up with 7 new bowstrings, I will be as weak as anybody else. So she's like, I'm going to test that theory. And she ties him up with 7 bowstrings, and she had Philistines waiting there to ambush him. And then all of a sudden they come out, and she hollers for Samson. And when they did, he busted out of those bowstrings. And you would have thought then Samson would have learned something. But once again, she begs him for his secret. And he toys with her again. And he tells her, hey, if I'm tied up with brand new ropes, there's no way I can get out. I'll be weak just like everybody else. And then once again, she had some men in hiding. They come out. She hollers. He's ambushed, but he breaks free from the ropes. You would think Samson would have learned. But his cavalier attitude is to see how close he can get to the fire without being burned. He had to know that Delilah was against him. And she begs him again for a 3rd time. And he tells her, if you take the 7 locks of my hair and you weave them in a loom, I would lose my strength. And so for a 3rd time, the Philistine shows up and he breaks free. And after all these 3 times, Delilah says in Judges 16 and 15, how can you tell me you love me? You won't even share your secrets with me. You've made fun of me 3 times now. And you still haven't told me what makes you so strong. Verse 16, I'm reading this. She tormented him with her nagging day after day until he was sick to death. I don't know what that's like. I've never been there. So I'm going to quickly jump to verse 17. Finally, Samson shared his secret with her. The word says, my hair has never been cut, he confessed. For I was dedicated to God as a Nazirite from birth. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as anybody else. And it was at that moment she knew he was telling the truth. Why would Samson make such an obviously terrible decision Why would he allow someone who he knows is against him? Samson wasn't thinking clearly. I'll say it that vanilla. He was mesmerized by her, and she lulls him to sleep in her lap. And the Philistines quietly come in, and they shave his head. And now for a fourth time, she cries out, "Samson, the Philistines!" And Samson wakes up and he is ready to shake himself free like he did the last 3 times. But this is the most depressing part of the whole story. The Bible says, but Samson didn't even realize that the Lord had left him. Samson didn't even realize the Lord had left him. My God, we can be so busy with life. We can be so intent on doing our own thing. The distractions can be at a fever pitch in our lives. We're running hard, working, doing our own thing, and God isn't really in the equation. Maybe you come to church on Sundays, but the rest of the days you're doing you, and you don't even think about God again until next Sunday. And the storm comes, and you're ready to fight, and without realizing it, just like Samson, the Lord has left you in your own decisions. My God, what a place. The Bible says to put on the whole armor of God. But in our chaotic lives, we tend to leave out a piece or two. And then that leaves us vulnerable to an attack of the enemy. And when we leave parts of our body exposed to the enemy, he will exploit you and he will attack you. And without having on the whole armor of God, you're gonna take some hits and it's gonna hurt and you're gonna have consequences. That's just reality. But what is more important for you to know that even in those times, it's not over for you. Even King David, a man after God's own heart, messed up big time. Dude sleeps with another man's wife. Then to hide that secret, he puts him in the front line so he gets killed. Then he takes that woman as his own wife. How messed up is that? And as a consequence, the child from their affair died. But it wasn't over for David. That wasn't the end of his story. And for Samson, at this point, he's captured by the Philistine. His eyes are gouged out. He has been humbled. Dad, this is the best piece of advice I can give you. If you don't hear anything else from me, you better hear this today. Humble yourself before God humbles you. Whew. Let me tell you, because when God humbles you, whoo, brother, it's painful, it's embarrassing, it's expensive, it hurts, and it's a long road back. I'm telling you, you don't want God to humble you. Hashtag been there. Samson paid a high price for his way of living. But he didn't lose his purpose. The gifts and calling of God on your life are irrevocable. Here's what that means, Dad. No matter how much you've failed, no matter how much you've fallen short, no matter how many bad decisions you've made, the purpose on your life, God's call on your life, it is still there. You may have exhausted plans A through Z in your life, but God still has more maneuverability, and he can adjust the plan to meet you where you are and to get you back on track. He's still a creative God. He is still working on your behalf. You've not been disqualified. You've not been shelved. God still has a purpose and a plan for your life. You may have lost out on some years. You may have messed up some relationships along the way. And I don't want to make light of anything, but I've got to tell you today that God's purpose in your life is still intact. But some of you have been acting and living like you've lost it. You've been acting like you're damaged goods, and God can't use you anymore. You've gone too far. You've messed up too bad. And so you've sort of just given up on living out your purpose because you feel like you've messed up. I want to tell you, you couldn't be more wrong. God still has a plan for your life. His call is still there. You still have kingdom purpose. You still have more in front of you than what's behind you, because God has a way of restoring time. He said through the prophet Joel, I will restore the years to you that have been eaten up. All of those wasted years, those seasons of apathy, those decisions that you regret, God can restore. That's what he does. And because your purpose is still intact, but in spite of the decisions we make, that means there's still more for you. And this is what happens with Samson. He finds himself in a terrible position. He's been blinded. He's bound. He's in chains. All the decisions that he had made in his life had led him to this point. You think it'd be all over for Samson. He's down, depressed, and broken. But thank God for verse 22. Whew. Verse 22 says, but before long, his hair began to grow back. I'm telling you, there's some of you in this room who have been down. You've beaten yourself up over and over again. You've struggled getting over your past. But today, God is restoring your strength to you. Samson's hair began to grow back. The source of his strength began to return. And for you, I want to encourage you today. Your hair can grow again. Obviously, there's no hope for me. But God can begin to use you again, no matter your past, no matter the price you've paid, no matter how much you've lost, no matter how bad it's been. You can be restored. You can be delivered. You can be the man you've always wanted to be. You can still fulfill God's purpose in your life. Because when Samson's hair began to grow back, his strength began to return. And in this moment, to make a spectacle out of him, the Philistines bring him out to be entertained by him. And they bring him out in chains. There's a boy who leads Samson out, and Samson asks the boy, would you put my hands on these pillars that was holding up this building where thousands of Philistines were sitting on the roof? And with his strength being restored, his impending death was going to mean something. Yeah, he made some mistakes along the way, but his purpose never left him. Because he put his two hands on the pillar. And with one final burst of supernatural strength, he begun to push the pillars of that building to the point that the building began to come crashing down. And with the last bit of strength, he used it to kill more Philistines in his death than he ever had in his whole life. And that day when the rooftop collapsed at the hands of Samson, Israel began to be rescued because 3,000 Philistines died that day. When God restores you, your purpose is still intact. The gifts and calling of God is still on your life, and today can be the day for you to be restored. There is still hope for you. There is still purpose for you. I know you're tired. I know you're weary. I know you're overworked and underpaid and definitely underappreciated. And just because you carry it well don't mean it's not heavy. Some of you in this room feel like you've sacrificed purpose. Listen to me. Some of you feel like you've sacrificed purpose when you got married or had a kid unexpectedly. And you've never said anything to anybody. You've worked with a smile on your face, all the while feeling like you've cheated yourself out of your destiny because you had to settle for the choices that you made. You hearing me? It's quiet. But I'm here to tell you today that the gifts that the Spirit has given you, the call that has been on your life since before you were in your mother's womb, you didn't give them up. You didn't disqualify yourself. God hasn't forgotten about you. They are still there waiting on you to say yes. If you will give God your yes today, all those dreams you had as a child and as a teenager, all of those dreams and those visions that God had put in you when you were young, they've been dormant all of these years. They're still there. God is calling you today to tell you that your strength is being restored. Your hair is growing back. The source of your strength is coming back. And yes, you can change. You can be all that God created you to be. You can be that husband you want to be. You can be that father you want to be. You can be that man of God that you've been created to be.